Wednesday. I'm waiting for Wednesday. I'm waiting for Wednesday. I pray you put me on.
Hello everyone, this is Mr. Pete, and we're going to continue with the Wednesday Wars by Gary D. Schmidt. We're starting with May today, already to May, and of course we can't get to May without rehashing what happened at the tail end of April, and we ended with Holling getting to the baseball game and of course getting on the field and meeting all the Yankees, and of course Joe Pepitone and Horace Grant were there, the greatest Yankees of all time. They didn't interact at all with Mickey Mantle, but they did talk to Ralph Houck, the manager of the team, and some other players. But the big thing there was everyone there knew who Mrs. Baker was because she was that dame who ran in the 36 Olympics. And we did talk about those 36 Olympics as well. But really the bulk of the end of April was about that race. And you could tell that race gets to me every single time. That race where Danny Hupfer has trouble and gets beat up, and everybody sort of rallies around Holling, who doesn't want to pass those 8th graders because of who those 8th graders are, what they did to Danny, and really all it took was that dame, Mrs. Baker, telling him to pass those boys, and sure enough, she did. We can't talk about April without talking about Holling's sister. We still don't know her name, and how she has a conversation with her dad about going to college. Now she's planning on going to Columbia University. I mentioned Columbia is near and dear to my heart. I've been there a few times. But Columbia at the time was a place where young people in college were protesting against the war, protesting for peace. And I did show you those videos. And Dad, Mr. Hood, of course, was against her even going to. She has a job as my secretary. What a great, great dad. So, but that fantastic scene at the end of this, at the end of that chapter, where he pictures himself running through the outfield and he wins the race. Oh, I also do want to take note too, Mrs. Baker was up to something talking to the ownership of the New York Yankees, the administration, about something. May. At the beginning of May, Mrs. Sidman told us during morning announcements that this would be Atomic Bomb Awareness Month. You might think that this would have caught our attention, but it didn't. Every May brings Atomic Bomb Awareness Month to Camillo Junior High, right after the greening grass and the yellowing forsythia. It's so predictable that it's hard to work up enthusiasm. So that probably seems like ancient. And maybe even after I say this, it will still seem ancient. But in McCain Elementary, when I was a kid, we practiced hiding out in case there was a nuclear attack. And we did the exact same thing that they're doing in this book. So of course, we'll have to find some video on that, because ponder what would happen during an atomic bomb attack, a nuclear attack, and then ponder what they're about to do. But Mrs. Sidman had clearly determined that this year, maybe because it was her first year as principal, she would give us the big M, momentum. Since we are living so very close to New York City, she said, Camillo Junior High School is certainly a likely target for an atomic bomb. If the Soviet Union should ever choose to attack, it behooves us to be prepared. We will begin a series of atomic bomb drills this afternoon. When the sirens blow, I expect everyone to follow our government's drill procedures precisely. Behooves, said Danny. Becomes necessary, Mr. Hupfer, said Mrs. Baker, as in it behooves us to raise our hands before we ask a question. Now, can anyone tell me what the adjectival form would be? Teachers, they can't help it. True. I don't think that any of us really believe that Leonid Brezhnev was sitting in the deep, dark rooms of the Kremlin plotting to drop an atomic bomb on Camillo Junior High. But even so, there was an eerie feeling when the sirens began to wail just before the end of the day, and Mrs. Baker stood up from her desk and clapped her hands at us. I'm pretty sure she was trying not to roll her eyes. She told us to scrunch under our desks, no talking. She told us to put our hands over our heads, absolute silence. And she told us to breathe quietly and evenly. really, as if we had forgotten how. When we were finally settled, and all this took a while since Marilee wouldn't sit on the floor until she'd spread some clean poster board first, Mrs. Baker opened the classroom door, pulled the shades down on all the windows, turned the lights off, and then patrolled up and down the aisles. I bet she was rolling her eyes then. It doesn't take very long when you're scrunched under your desk with your hands over your head, breathing quietly and evenly, to feel three things. One, that your spine is not meant to bend like this. Two, that if you don't stretch your legs out soon, they are going to spasm and you'll lose all feeling and probably not be able to walk for a very long time. Three, that you are going to throw up any minute because you can see the wads of bazooka bubblegum that Danny Hupfer has been sticking under his desk all year, which now look like little wasp nests hanging down. Simile. But we followed our government's drill procedures precisely and stayed under our desks for 18 minutes until the wind would have whisked away the first waves of airborne radioactive particles, and the blast of burning air would have passed overhead, and the mushroom cloud would no longer be expanding, and every living thing would have been incinerated except for us, because we were scrunched under our gummy desks with our hands over our heads, breathing quietly and evenly. Boy, there's a reaction for you. We got up when Mrs. Sidman peered into our classroom and told us that we had done quite well and that we were beginning to be prepared. All right, I want you to ponder what getting under your desks would actually do. I guess that was sort of comforting, and I bet it made Leonid Brezhnev tremble in his boots, especially if he really did have it in for Camillo Junior High. Actually, there seemed to be a lot of people who needed comfort these days, especially the 8th grade varsity runners who were taking the Salisbury Park race way too personally. I mean, our whole team came in before anyone else on any of the other Long Island teams. Mr. Catrini had given us 2 practices off to celebrate. We got our team picture in the Hometown Chronicle holding the trophy. What more do you want? Apparently a whole lot. Let me tell you, you don't want to open your gym locker and find that someone has squirted shaving cream into it. And you don't want to find that the shoelaces on your sneakers are missing, or tied up in knots that take about a day and a half to get out, or that your shorts are hanging from the rafters in the gym ceiling, or that they're sopping wet and not from water in the sink. I think something must happen to you when you get into 8th grade. Like the Doug Switek's brothers gene switches on and you become a jerk. Which may have been Hamlet, Prince of Denmark's problem, who, besides having a name that makes him sound like a breakfast special at Sunnyside Morning Restaurant, something between ham slice and a 3-egg omelet, didn't have the smarts to figure out that when someone takes the trouble to come back from beyond the grave to tell you that he's been murdered, it's probably behooveful, good use of vocabulary hauling, to pay attention, which is the adjectival form. Anyway, I stayed behind the 8th grade pack in practice these days. They didn't spin anymore, but I figured that if I tried to pass them, they would probably leave my bloody body on the side of the road. But the 8th grade varsity runners weren't anything compared with my father, who really needed some comfort because of what the Hometown Chronicle reported on May 3rd. Here is the headline. Local architect firm to renovate Yankee Stadium. I guess I don't have to tell you that the local architect firm was not Hood and Associates. It was Kowalski and Associates. The story had words like these: multi-million-dollar job, 3-year commitment, highest visibility of any local firm, and Kowalski a sure bet for Chamber of Commerce businessman of 1968. All of which made the job for a new junior high school seem pretty tame by comparison. Suppers were very quiet for a few days. My father mostly concentrated on his lima beans until my sister pointed out that a steady diet of lima beans had already killed lab rats and was probably killing us. See, said my father looking up, You can learn all sorts of useful and valuable information without going to Columbia University. And that's good, because no one is going to Columbia University these days, are they? And no one will, since they're going to shut down classes because their students think that life is all about standing on the streets and chanting slogans, instead of working hard and finally getting what they deserve. Did he get what he deserved? Not the job. I'm going to Columbia University as soon as I finish high school. You will be going to Columbia University when lima beans fly. Which was the moment that my sister demonstrated that lima beans can fly across the table, past my face, mostly, and onto the scale model of the new junior high school. Toads, beetles, bats. That was the last night my sister came down for supper. Every night afterward, she'd take her plate and eat in her room, alone with the beetles in their yellow submarine. Probably she didn't eat a single lima bean. Still, my father did find some of the comfort that he wanted. The day after the supper of the flying lima beans, he came home with a brand new Ford Mustang convertible. It was white with a genuine leather interior. It had an AM/FM radio. Really, it had a 390 big block V8 engine and a stick shift 4-speed transmission that could take you up to 160 miles per hour if you wanted. The chrome glittering across the front grille gleamed so brightly that you had to take your eyes away from it when the sun struck just right. It made a sound like power. It was, all in all, the most beautiful, perfect, car that God has ever allowed to be made on earth. Hyperbole. My mother and father went for a drive in it every evening, right after Walter Cronkite was finished. They backed out of the driveway slowly, my mother waving at us and laughing as if she was in high school and going on a date. My father would be concentrating on the road since he didn't want his Ford Mustang to be near any other car that might come too close and spatter a pebble up at the chrome. During the day, he left it parked in the driveway, probably because he thought it would look just right in front of the perfect house, and probably so that Chit wouldn't park his yellow VW Bug there. My father wanted to be sure that people didn't think he was driving a Bug with pink and orange flower decals, which no one in the running for Chamber of Commerce businessman of 1968 would drive. At night, after it was too dark to see how wonderful the Ford Mustang looked in front of the perfect house, he pulled the station wagon out from the garage, drove the Mustang in away from the nighttime dew, and parked the station wagon in the driveway. He did love the Mustang. He watched over it like his reputation. Gosh, what a great phrase. He watched over it like his capital reputation. Your reputation, of course, is how people perceive you. You have a reputation. Like, these are the things that you've done in your life. And because you've done these things, this is how people look at you. So, his dad wants to be perfect and powerful. And having that Mustang makes him perfect and powerful. I dreamed of driving that car, the AM/FM radio on, the top down and the wind big and loud, left hand curved around the wheel, right hand playing on the stick on the shift, seeing if it really could reach 160 miles an hour on a long straight stretch. But I wonder if even the brand new Ford Mustang convertible comforted my father any the night my sister left for California to find herself. We didn't discover anything until the next morning. My father was already at work when my mother went to wake my sister up and found only a note on her bed. By the time you read this, I will be somewhere on the highway heading toward the Rocky Mountains with Chit. I'll call when I can. Don't worry, and don't try to follow me. That was all she wrote. For supper, my mother set only 3 places. She did not cook lima beans. She did not say anything while my father swore up and down that my sister had made her own decision, that she would have to live with it, that he wouldn't send her a dime, not a dime, if she got into trouble, that she better not call him first because he was likely to tell her exactly what he thought of her. Didn't she realize that this didn't help his business reputation or his chances for the Chamber of Commerce businessman of 1968, which that creep Kowalski was trying to steal from him? And why weren't there any lima beans for supper tonight? That evening, my mother did not go for a drive in the Mustang with my father. He drove off alone without even listening to Walter Cronkite, and I did the dishes alone. I wondered what it was like for my sister cramped into a yellow Volkswagen Beetle with the folded and hairy chit heading toward the sunset, going off to find herself. I wondered what exactly she would find, and I wondered if it wouldn't be a whole lot better going off to find yourself in a brand new Ford Mustang convertible with a 390 big block engine. There's Dad being special again, talking about the sister in a very negative way because it'll affect him, not worried about his own daughter. Maybe he is, and maybe that's just the way he acts. But boy, oh boy. Our house grew quiet and still. My father stopped watering the azalea bushes along the front walk, and they drooped and began to die. There was no music from upstairs. There were no more lima beans, which, let me tell you, didn't cause me much sorrow. But there was hardly any talk. And what words there were felt careful, since there was a whole lot that no one wanted to talk about. Sort of like things between Claudius, Gertrude, and Hamlet. You can say a lot if the whole time you're wondering if everyone else is really thinking about the thing you're not supposed to be thinking about because you're afraid the thing you're not supposed to be thinking about is going to harrow you with fear and wonder or something like that. As you can tell, Mrs. Baker had me reading The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark, for May, which I think was punishment for taking off April. This was slow stuff, and even Romeo had it all over Hamlet. The ghost was okay, and the gravediggers, but when you write about characters who talk too much, the only way that you can show that they talk too much is to make them talk too much. Then that just gets annoying. So anytime I saw a speech by Hamlet or Polonius or, well, just about anybody, I skipped over it pretty quickly, and I don't think I missed a thing. I shared this insight into reading Shakespeare with Mary Lee, who, by the way, was not going to move, who now knew who Mickey Mantle was and who had memorized the entire Yankee roster. I don't think that's a good way to read something, said Mary Lee. Why not? You can't just skip the boring parts. Of course I can skip the boring parts. How do you know if they're boring if you don't read them? I can tell. Then you can't say you've read the whole play. I think I can still live a happy life, Mary Lee, even if I don't read the boring parts of The Tragedy of Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. Who knows, she said. Maybe you can't. I tried my insight into reading Shakespeare on Mrs. Baker. I see, said Mrs. Baker, but doesn't this play in particular pose a problem for your new method, Mr. Hoodhood? What problem? That there are no boring parts in this Shakespeare's greatest play of all? She looked at me, and she almost folded her arms across her chest, but stopped at the last second. I guess that would be a problem, I said. Read it all, said Mrs. Baker, even Polonius. And if it gets boring, it won't get boring. It already is boring, and I suggest you start again. This is the story of a son who is asked to take vengeance for what has happened to his father, who has been dreadfully murdered. But he's not sure that he can trust anyone in his family. What might you do in such a situation? I'd run over the murderer with a Ford Mustang. Short of that colorful extremity. Well, I said, I guess I'd start by looking around for someone to trust. Mrs. Baker nodded. Now, she said, begin the play. The next day, right after lunch recess, the atomic bomb sirens wailed again in Camillo Junior High. I guess Leonid Brezhnev was still at it. We scrunched under our desks again and put our hands over our heads. No talking, absolute silence, breathe quietly and evenly. This rots, said Danny Hupfer. No talking, please, said Mrs. Baker. I have a question, said Danny. After the drill, said Mrs. Baker. This is important, said Danny. Mrs. Baker sighed. What is it, Mr. Hupfer? Isn't it dangerous for you not to be under your desk? Thank you for your concern. I will take the risk. But suppose an atomic bomb was really coming down, right on top of Camillo Junior High. Then, said Mrs. Baker, we wouldn't have to diagram any sentences for the rest of the afternoon. It might be worth it, whispered Danny. If Danny sounded a little snippy, you have to realize that his bar mitzvah was coming up, and he was more terrified of his bar mitzvah than an atomic bomb. He was really touchy about it, even when you tried to encourage him. You've been taking Hebrew lessons for this for a year, I'd remind him. Years. So, how hard can it be? How hard can it be? How hard can it be? How hard do you think it can be if your rabbi is standing right next to you and your parents and grandparents are watching you, along with every aunt and uncle and cousin and second cousin, even some you've never met, and two great aunts who immigrated from Poland in 1913, and a great uncle who escaped the Tsar, and every one of them is looking at you and crying and waiting for you to make a mistake, and if you do, they'll holler out the right word and stare at you like you've shamed the whole family, and they'll never, ever be able to walk into the synagogue again. How hard do you think it could be? Maybe it would help, I said, if you scrunched under your desk and breathed quietly and evenly. Marilee and my tea and I decided that we should find better ways to help Danny than putting gum up our noses. So every lunch recess for most of May, we sat inside and listened to him recite what he was going to read at the service, even though we had no idea if the words he was saying were coming out right or not. At the end of every recess, he was always ready to run away to California. Look how they're being good friends to him. I can't do this, he'd say. You can do this, we'd say. I don't want to do this, he'd say. You want to do this, we'd say. I don't even care about this, he'd say. You care about this, we'd say. It was sort of like a play, which, as you know, I have some experience at. That's how it went. Every day. You can see how that didn't put us into the mood for atomic bomb drills, which was too bad, since in May there wasn't a single day that went by that we didn't practice for an atomic bomb. Marilee and my tea spent most of the time under their desks softly singing the music from Camelot, which Mrs. Baker didn't seem to mind, even though there was supposed to be absolute quiet. Danny practices Hebrew, which is hard to do when you have your hands clasped over your head. I threw spitballs at him, which is even harder to do when you have your hands clasped over your head. And Doug Switek went to sleep. And when he went to sleep, he really went to sleep. Let me tell you, you don't want to be in the 7th grade and have people hear you snore. What you hear when you wake up is humiliating. Not as humiliating as yellow tights with white feathers on the butt, but humiliating enough. It was one of those hot, still days that come before summer and that remind you what July is going to be like. When I scrunched under the desk, I could feel immediately that the air there was kind of heavy and steamy and that I was going to start sweating pretty quickly, which I did. This was really unfair since everyone else had already left for Temple Bethel or St. Adalbert's. I think that Mrs. Baker probably agreed. This, Mr. Hoodhood, is ridiculous, she said, and she wasn't even scrunched under her desk. I leaned out from under my desk. My hands were still clasped over my head. Mrs. Baker, I said, even though I was supposed to be breathing quietly. Yes, she said. Would you mind not calling me Mr. Hoodhood? It sounds like you're talking to my father. Mrs. Baker sat down at Danny's desk. You're still angry about opening day, she said. I just don't want to be him already. But you have similarities. Marilee showed me your drawing. It was wonderful. Anyone can see that you have the soul of an architect. Maybe, I said. But you want to decide for yourself, said Mrs. Baker. I nodded. I wanted to decide for myself. And you're afraid, said Mrs. Baker, that you won't get the chance. That I won't get the chance to see what I can do with the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, I said. Not many people do, said Mrs. Baker. Even Hamlet waited too long. The sirens wailed as if to remind us that there was supposed to be absolute silence. This is ridiculous, Mrs. Baker said again. Here we are in the middle of Act 3, and we have to leave Shakespeare to curl up underneath a desk for an atomic bomb drill, which is, by my count, the 16th time you've practiced curling beneath a desk. As if anyone needed to practice curling beneath a desk. She rolled her eyes. Then she seemed to make a sudden decision. She gave up patrolling the aisles and walked back to the coat room. She seemed to be rummaging around And then suddenly there was a crash and a splatter, and almost instantly the entire classroom smelled like Long John Silver and his crew were yo-ho-hoing over bottles of rum. Lots of bottles of rum. Mrs. Baker's voice came out of the courtroom. It seems that the crock with Mr. Kabakoff's Pilgrim cider has fallen from the top shelf. Would you please run and bring Mr. Van Larry? I did. When he came into the classroom, his eyes widened. Smells like a brewery in this classroom, he said. Indeed, said Mrs. Baker. You'll have to air it out after you mop up the cider. You can't stay in here with the smell like this, he said. Do you think so? Said Mrs. Baker. She looked at me. Then we shall have to go on a field trip. A field trip? I said. She did that on purpose. We are going to survey points of local architectural interest. I thought for a minute. Are there any? Mrs. Baker had pulled her white sneakers out from her lower desk drawer. She looked up at me. Yes, she said. And that's where we're going to stop today. So, Holling's sister has run away. Dad has flipped out, partially because of the sister, partially because of Mr. Kowalski getting that New York Yankees job, which is a big deal. Those stadiums cost millions of dollars even back then. So his architectural firm is going to get lots of money for doing that. And Marilee gets to stay. So I want you to think about what Mrs. Baker did. She's the one who talked to the New York Yankees and got them to look at Mr. Kowalski as the next architect. All right, we are going to stop there. And tomorrow we are going to pick up with May Part 2. Part 2. May Part 2, Electric Boogaloo. Peace.
Dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum, beetle dum dum. There was a turtle by the name of Bert, and Bert the turtle was very alert. When danger threatened him, he never got hurt. He knew just what to do. He ducked and covered, ducked and covered.
He did what we all must learn to do. You
And you,
and you and you.
duck and cover.
Be sure and remember what Bert the Turtle just did, friends, because every one of us must remember to do the same thing. That's what this film is all about. Duck and cover. This is an official civil defense film produced in cooperation with the Federal Civil Defense Administration and in consultation with the Safety Commission of the National Education Association. Produced by Archer Productions, Incorporated. Hey, Bert, come on out and meet all these nice people, please. Oh, all right. We really can't blame you. You see, Bert is a very, very careful fellow. When there's danger, this is the way he keeps from being hurt. Sometimes it even saves his life. That's why these children are practicing to duck and cover just as you do in your school. We all know the atomic bomb is very dangerous. Since it may be used against us, we must get ready for it, just as we are ready for many other dangers that are around us all the time. First, you'll have to know what happens when an atomic bomb explodes. You'll know when it comes. We hope it never comes, but we must get ready. It looks something like this. There is a bright flash, brighter than the sun, brighter than anything you've ever seen. If you were not ready and did not know what to do, it could hurt you in different ways. It could knock you down hard or throw you against a tree or a wall. It is such a big explosion, it can smash in buildings and knock signboards over and break windows all over town. But if you duck and cover like Bert, you will be much safer. Now, you and I don't have shells to crawl into like Bert the Turtle, so we have to cover up in our own way. First, you duck, and then you cover. And very tightly, you cover the back of your neck and your face. Duck and cover underneath a table or desk or anything else close by. In Betty's school, they are talking about the atomic bomb, too. Betty is asking her teacher, How can we tell when the atomic bomb may explode? And a teacher is explaining that there are two kinds of attack, with warning and without any warning. We think that most of the time we will be warned before the bomb explodes, so there will be time for us to get into our homes, schools, or some other safe place. Our civil defense workers and our men in uniform will do everything they can to warn us before enemy planes can bring a bomb near us. You may be in your schoolyard playing when the signal comes. That signal means to stop whatever you are doing and get to the nearest safe place fast. Always remember, the flash of an atomic bomb can come at any time, no matter where you may be. Here are some older boys showing what to do if the flash comes when you are not in the classroom. This is what to do if you should be in a corridor. You duck and cover tight against the wall this way. Remember to keep your face and the back of your neck covered tightly. Try to fall away from windows or doors with glass in them. Then, if the glass breaks and flies through the air, it won't cut you. You might be eating your lunch when the flash comes. Duck and cover under the table. Then, if the explosion makes anything in the room fall down, it can't fall on you. We must know how to duck and cover in the school bus or in any other bus or streetcar. Duck and cover. Don't wait. Duck away from the windows fast. The glass may break and fly through the air and cut you. If you do not know just what to do, ask your teacher when this film is over. Discuss what you could do in different places if a bomb explodes.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
No! No!